everybody. I'm Steve Taylor, CTO of DeployHub. Today we're going to do SBOMs for all using Ortelius. So first let's give you some background on Ortelius. So Ortelius is a microservice catalog that governs your microservice supply chain by tracking your microservice versions, the blast radius of a service, the inventory, the SBOMs, CVEs, and vulnerabilities, the service catalog information such as the owner of a service. And we do this to give you a proactive view of your microservice application as it's changing over time. Ortelius is an incubating project under the CD Foundation, and our mission is to simplify the adoption of microservices through a world-class microservice management platform driven by a supportive and diverse global open source community. In other words, we have a great team from all over the world on the open source project here. So our topic today is we're going to talk about hardening cybersecurity in a cloud native environment, meaning that we need to track not just a microservice SBOM, but more importantly, the application's SBOM. In a decoupled architecture, it's almost impossible to create an application SBOM without using something like Ortelius. A little bit of information about me. Like I said, I'm the DeployHub CTO. I am one of the architects on the Ortelius open source project. I am on the technical oversight committee for the CD Foundation, and I'm a Persia open source contributor and been doing this for over 20 years. Please reach out to me on my LinkedIn, send me a message, and we'll get a conversation going. So let's take a look at how SBOMs have moved along and the problems that they face in a microservice type of architecture. So traditionally, we had the traditional monolith application. So that's being replaced by a lot of little microservices. So when we first had the monolith, we would go ahead and create a single SBOM because we had a big giant package that we were working with. You know, we delivered this big giant package, and therefore we had one big giant SBOM. And that SBOM was usually created out of the build process, the compile and link step. Now, with the shift over to microservices, the microservices are independently deployable functions, and they're pushed across the supply chain all day long. And because of this, each one has its own build and therefore its own SBOM. So if we try to think about looking at the application SBOM in a microservice architecture, it really doesn't exist because everything has been decomposed. So what we need to do is take another look at what a microservice application really looks like. It actually is a collection of microservices, all the microservices that are needed to make the application run. So if we have 100 microservices that are used to make our application run, we're going to have to pull all those together and represent our application logically. So when we take that view, it's going to be very much more complex than our traditional monolith. And remember, every time we create a new or update a microservice, we should have a new version or new logical version of our microservice application. So because of this, we have a lot of change happening that we need to keep track of. And because of that, the SBOMs get even more complicated because remember, when we're talking about these microservices having their own build, we have to look at those builds happening all day long, and those builds are going to create their own individual SBOM. And in truth, SBOMs are not only there's many levels to them. So we'll have a hardware SBOM. What we're using ARM versus AMD. What was OS being used when we created this? What was the compiler? What were all the dependencies, including the transitive dependencies that were consumed? What was the package manager doing? And finally, when we pulled it all together, how does this new SBOM relate up to our applications? And now This is happening for every single microservice that we're creating. And if we have like I said, if we have 100 microservices in our logical application, we're going to have 100 SBOMs that we need to start tracking and managing. So how do we fix the problem? Well, we're going to aggregate up all those microservice SBOMs, including their vulnerabilities up to the application level. And we're going to pull that together at the logical viewpoint. So this aggregation has to occur to give us that view from the application point of view. So how do we make all this work? First, like a producer of the microservice, and one of those developers is going to give us and create us the base version of the microservice in Ortelius. This base version is going to give us the starting point to start tracking the SBOMs and the relationships. One of our feature enhancements is when the developer registers their new service, that will integrate with Backstage or Cookie Cutter to go ahead and generate the back-end pipeline plumbing to have everything all ready to go on the pipeline side. Also, we'll be adding tags to domains to help searching for microservices a bit easier. And then the consumer, who's going to be, the front end developer, is going to need to say which versions of the microservices that they want to start consuming. And this is where we build the relationships between the producer and the consumer. And in this case, we're pulling in about a dozen microservices into our logical view of our application. Now we do this once. Again, this is at the base version, and this gives us the starting point. And from there on, it's going to be self-maintaining. As the CI process comes along, we update a service. We know where the previous one was used, and therefore we can generate new logical application versions going forward. So it's really nice because it's you define it once and forget about it, and it just keeps going, collecting the data that we need to aggregate forward. So if we look at it from kind of like a tabular view, like I said, every time we do our build of our Docker image for our service, we're going to get a new version, and then in turn we're going to get a new version of our application. It may seem overkill, but every single version of a microservice and the corresponding application version has the potential going to production. So even though most of them will probably only make it to a certain point in your pipeline process, it gives you the choice of which ones to want to be release candidate, and therefore which ones are going to make it out to production. We need to keep track of all that information so we have a history and a timeline of what's happening with your application as changes are being made to it. So when we look at it from the pipeline automation point of view, the microservice developer is going to go ahead and make changes to their service. They're going to kick off their Docker build. After the Docker build, we're going to bring in Ortelius to grab information. We'll actually run a SBOM scanning tool, something like Sift. That will give us the SBOM for that service. From there, we can drive the CVEs and vulnerabilities. Also, we're going to grab information about the artifact itself, things like the Docker tag, Docker SHA, Docker digest, the GitHub version, the Git commit, server's catalog information. All that is gathered by the Ortelius step in the pipeline. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and update Ortelius and tell Ortelius about all that information, and it will go ahead and give us a new logical view of our application at that point. So we'll create a new version of the component and subsequently create a new logical version of the application. And this gives us the ability to aggregate, again, the SBOM up, look at the versioning of your application as it's happening over time, do difference reports, do trend analysis, those types of things at the application level. And that's the important thing. We're doing this for every single service, and therefore we get this nice complete picture at the application level. So what does it look like when we start looking at the data from the application point of view? You can see here on the left table panel, we got our vulnerability list. And in that vulnerability list, you can see which component the vulnerability is showing up. So if the same vulnerability is in multiple microservices, we'll report that, or if it's only in one, we'll be able to show that as well. But here you're able to see from the application point of view, where do all your vulnerabilities exist across all your services that your application is using. And then on the right, we have our SBOM, and here we're listing all the packages that are being consumed across all the services and what licenses those packages are using. You know, that the licensing is concerned. Maybe you have a GNU license in there, and the lawyers say you can't use anything from GNU. This will allow you to find that information at the application point of view. So again, this is where we want to aggregate together everything so it's actually useful. Hundreds of SBOMs floating around, at the container level is just not manageable to be able to go ahead and interrogate and investigate them. That's why we have to roll them up to the application level. And that's what Ortelius does. And it does it right out of the box without any special changes to your pipeline at that level. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And if you want to get involved or want to get some more information about Ortelius, go out to the Ortelius.io website, and you'll see the link there, how to join the project, and hopefully you'll come aboard. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.